You know, usually when we think about humanity's boldest leaps into the unknown, like venturing out into deep space, we
Mm.
picture this highly coordinated military precision machine.
Oh, absolutely. Like crisp uniforms, everyone acting with total unity.
Right. The captain says jump, and 1,000 perfectly trained individuals just execute the command flawlessly without, a second of hesitation.
The idealized, streamlined crew, no friction, no internal debates holding up the process. I mean, it's binary. You encounter a problem, you execute the preordained solution, and you just move forward.
Exactly. It's clean. And I mean, it's a deeply comforting thought. We really want to believe that when the stakes are at their absolute highest, when we're floating in the dark void of space, humanity will just seamlessly pull together.
But then, of course, you introduce human nature.
Yeah, you introduce the reality of academic egos.
Yeah.
What if instead of a disciplined military crew, you loaded a spaceship with like 1,000 hyper-specialized scientists? And you gave them all their own distinct, heavily funded departments, put them in a giant tin can flying through the terrifying unknown, and then stripped away their ability to communicate across those departmental lines.
Well, I mean, you've just described a recipe for absolute disaster. It is the definition of intellectual and operational muddy waters. You're basically building a Tower of Babel and launching it at light speed.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today on this deep dive is to explore a piece of history that, on the surface, might sound like just an old, fragile paperback you'd find stuffed in the back of a dusty used bookstore.
Right, something you'd walk right past.
Exactly. But it is actually the secret architectural foundation of our modern pop culture universe. We are looking at A.E. Van Vogel's 1950 science fiction book, The Voyage of the Space Beagle.
A true classic.
We're going to dive into how this slightly flawed, incredibly weird piece of pulp fiction inspired absolute titans of modern storytelling, while bizarrely and accurately predicting major real-world philosophical and scientific movements that we are literally still grappling with today.
To really appreciate how wild this book is, we need to look at its structural context first. This isn't your traditional novel.
What do you mean?
Well, it wasn't written from page 1 to page 300 in a single sitting with a pre-planned outline. It was published in 1950 as what the industry calls a fix-up novel.
A fix-up novel.
Yeah, Van Vogt essentially compiled 4 previously published novellas and short stories that were written over a very turbulent 11-year period, from 1939 to 1950.
Wow, okay, so right across the entire span of World War II.
Exactly. So Black Destroyer and Discord in Scarlet came out in 1939, right on the brink of the war. M33 and Andromeda was published in 1943, deep into the conflict. And War of Nerves came out in 1950, at the dawn of the atomic age and the Cold War.
So he took these completely disparate stories and just wove them together to create this overarching narrative.
He did. And that gives the book a very specific, almost relentless kind of rhythm. It feels highly episodic.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the sources, you barely have time to breathe before the next catastrophe strikes the ship.
The episodic nature mimics a weekly adventure serial, almost like television before television was the standard medium for science fiction.
Right.
Because it's a fix-up, jumping from one intense scenario to another, critics and readers have noted it possesses this incredibly compelling, dreamlike intensity that just pulls you through these harem-scarum, life-or-death events at a breakneck speed.
It leaves you almost no time to question the underlying logic before, like, the next monster is banging on the airlock door.
Exactly. You're just along for the ride.
And before we get to the monsters banging on the doors, we have to look at the ship itself. The ship is essentially a character, or at least the society living inside the ship is.
The overarching framework of this voyage is telegraphed right there in the title. The Voyage of the Space Beagle.
Yeah, it's a giant neon sign homage to Charles Darwin's historic 19th century voyage on the HMS Beagle.
Right, which means this is not a battleship. It is not a military vessel looking to conquer or colonize. It is fundamentally a ship of scientific discovery.
And that distinction is basically the engine for the entire plot, isn't it?
That distinction is everything. If it were a military ship, the chain of command would resolve any internal issues immediately. A junior officer disobeys, they go to the brig.
Problem solved.
Right. But because it is a ship of discovery, the crew is made up of civilian scientists and officers, 1,000 of them.
1,000 scientists trapped together.
The primary connecting thread of this entire narrative isn't actually the external alien threats, though they are terrifying in their own right. The true through line is the brutal, almost pathological internal conflict and political infighting happening between these established scientific departments.
It's incredible to read about. You've got physicists, biologists, chemists, sociologists, and they are all trapped in their own academic silos.
Heavily fortified silos.
Yeah, looking through the source materials, I couldn't help but think about a modern corporate office or a massive university system. You, listening right now, likely know this dynamic intimately.
Whoa, anyone who has worked in a large organization knows this.
Right, like the marketing department refuses to talk to the engineering department because they speak different languages. The biology faculty looks down on the sociology faculty because they view their methodology as softer.
Everyone fiercely defends their own budget, their own perf, and their own highly specific way of looking at the world.
But in a corporate office, a failure to communicate means you miss a quarterly goal or a product launch gets delayed. On the Space Beagle, a failure to communicate means getting eaten by space monsters.
Which really raises the stakes on interdepartmental memos. Van Vogt is using this extreme deep space setting to diagnose a very real intellectual disease that was just beginning to take root in the mid-20th century, which is over-specialization.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, as human knowledge expanded exponentially, we started breaking it into smaller and smaller fragments. And the cure he presents for this disease comes in the form of our protagonist, Dr. Elliot Grevner.
And he practices something called Nexialism, right? Let's talk about Nexialism, because this is the big idea that drives everything.
It's the core concept of the entire book. It's a newly invented discipline.
If I'm understanding the sources correctly, Nexialism is essentially an early fictionalized version of what we now call consilience. That's a term popularized much later, in the late 90s, by the biologist E.O. Wilson, right? The idea that all knowledge is fundamentally united.
You've hit the nail on the head. Consilience is the principle that evidence from independent, unrelated sources can converge on strong, unified conclusions.
So, like bringing different puzzle pieces together.
Exactly. E.O. Wilson championed the idea that the integration of knowledge across different disciplines, biology, physics, anthropology, the humanities, is the absolute key to true scientific progress.
So a problem in sociology might be solved by an insight from evolutionary biology.
Yes. Now, Wilson was writing about this decades later, but Van Vogt was laying the theoretical groundwork for it in 1950. The text gives us a very specific definition of Nexialism.
Which is?
It calls it the science of joining in an orderly fashion the knowledge of one field of learning with that of other fields.
And Grosvenor's the sole practitioner of this science on board the Space Beagle, right?
The only one. He doesn't just study chemistry or physics. He studies the connective tissue between them.
Which sounds incredibly practical and necessary. I mean, if you're encountering alien life, you'd want someone who can synthesize the biology, the chemistry of the atmosphere, and the sociology of their ruins. But on this ship, Grosvenor is treated like an absolute pariah.
He is despised because in a culture of hyperspecialization, a generalist who claims to synthesize all fields is seen as an arrogant threat to everyone's individual authority.
Oh, I see.
Imagine you have spent 30 years becoming the preeminent scholar on cellular division, and some young upstart comes along and says your data is incomplete because you haven't factored in the sociological behavior of the organism. You'd be insulted.
Yeah, you'd want to throw him out the airlock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The head of the chemistry department, a man named Gregory Kent, becomes one of the primary antagonists simply because Grosvenor's holistic approach threatens his siloed kingdom.
But the novel argues and demonstrates repeatedly that to solve problems that are beyond the scope of a single specialist, you need that holistic approach.
You absolutely need it to survive.
And this is incredibly relevant to you, the listener, right now in your own life. We live in an era where you are heavily incentivized to pick a hyper-specific lane.
More than ever.
You are told to be the expert in one tiny fraction of software coding, or one specific branch of medical billing, or one highly specialized niche of digital marketing.
But when a massive, complex crisis hits, whether it's a global supply chain failure, a pandemic, or a sudden massive shift in your industry driven by AI, the person who only knows their one tiny puzzle piece is paralyzed.
Right, the Nexialist, the person who can step back and see how the supply chain disruption affects the marketing budget, which affects the engineering timeline, is the one who adapts and survives.
It is a profound argument against the blinders of overspecialization. And to see exactly why those blinders, that strictly siloed thinking, are so deadly, we don't have to wait long.
No, we don't.
The very first planetary landing the Space Beagle makes serves as a brutal awakening. It's a moment where these rigid academic assumptions meet an unforgiving, visceral reality.
Let's get into that first encounter. This comprises chapters 1 through 6, originally published as the novella Black Destroyer. The ship lands on this desolate, lifeless planet. It's incredibly bleak.
Very bleak.
But they find the ruins of an ancient, massive civilization. So he knows something highly intelligent used to be here, but now it's just crumbled stone.
And this is where Van Vogt weaves in another massive real-world philosophical concept that acts as the bedrock for the entire novel: Oswald Spengler's theory of historical cycles.
Okay, I'm not super familiar with Spengler.
Spengler published a massively influential book called The Decline of the West in the early 20th century. His thesis was that civilizations do not progress in a straight, infinitely upward line. Instead, they are organic.
Organic like a living thing.
Like a plant. A civilization is born, it experiences a vibrant spring, it matures into a rigid summer, it begins to decline in an autumnal phase, and finally, it experiences a winter of death and stagnation.
Oh, wow. So progress isn't guaranteed at all. Civilizations have a literal lifespan.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Van Vogt applies the Spenglerian framework directly to the aliens. The crew hasn't just landed on an empty rock, they've landed in the winter of an alien civilization.
The very end of it.
Yes. And amidst these Spenglerian ruins, they encounter a creature, a single powerful being known as the Kurl.
I want to spend some time on the anatomy of the Kurl, because it is wildly inventive. It is massive, like a giant panther.
Yeah.
But it also possesses tentacles sprouting from its shoulders.
A pamper with tentacles. It is an entirely formidable apex predator, but what's truly terrifying isn't its physical strength, it's the specific mechanism of its diet.
Right, it feeds on what the text defines as id. Now, id sounds like a Freudian psychological concept, but Van Vogt uses it purely biologically here, doesn't he?
He does. In this universe, the Kurl needs a specific chemical makeup to survive. The text defines this id as potassium suspended in living tissue.
So it's not just eating meat.
The Kurl doesn't just want meat. It specifically requires the electrochemical energy provided by living potassium. To give you some real-world context, in human biology, the sodium-potassium pump is absolutely vital for nerve function and muscle contraction.
Right, like we literally need it to move and think.
Without potassium, our cells can't generate the electrical signals needed to keep our hearts beating or our brains working. So the Kurl isn't just a hungry animal. It is essentially a biological vampire that feeds on the raw, living electrical potential of nerve cells.
That is horrifying. And 1,000 human scientists just landed on its desolate, dying planet like a massive walking buffet of living potassium.
A very arrogant buffet.
And here is where the siloed thinking of the scientists almost gets them all killed, because the Kurl is not just a beast. It is brilliant. It observes this massive ship, and it instantly calculates that if it attacks a fortress of 1,000 humans head-on, it will be obliterated by their superior technology.
It's way too smart for a frontal assault.
So it employs psychological deception. It literally pretends to be a dumb, harmless animal to infiltrate the ship. It plays the role of a curious, somewhat dim-witted beast.
Which preys perfectly on the blind spots of the scientists. This is the danger of assumptions. They are so deeply assured of their own superiority.
They just think, oh, look at the cute local fauna.
Think about how the different departments would react in their silos. The biologists look at the Kurl's physical structure and classify it as a feline analog.
Just a big cat.
Right. The physicists scan its environment and determine it lacks advanced technology. But because they don't combine their findings, because the biologists don't ask why a mere feline analog would possess the brain case capacity it has, and the physicists don't ask why the ruins show signs of advanced electromagnetic manipulation, they completely underestimate it.
It's wild. They bring it aboard the Space Beagle, assuming they have it fully contained. They treat it like a stray dog.
Yeah.
And then, surprise, crewmen start turning up dead in the corridors, completely drained of their potassium.
This is where Dr. Elliot Grosvenor and his Nexialism step into the spotlight. The solution to the Kurl crisis cannot be found in a single department's handbook.
Because the problem crosses boundaries.
Exactly. A chemist alone can't stop it, because they don't understand its predatory behavior. A biologist alone can't stop it, because they don't understand how it's manipulating the ship's electromagnetic locks to escape its cage at night.
Well, it was unlocking its own cage.
Yeah. Grosvenor has to synthesize the fragmented, isolated pieces of knowledge from across the ship. He takes the biological data regarding its potassium dependency, combines it with the sociological data of the ruined civilization, and factors in the physics of its movement.
He figures out what it needs and how it thinks.
Hmm.
And rather than just grabbing a laser rifle and running blindly into the dark corridors, he devises a psychological trap based on consilience.
A trap that actually plays on the coral's own intelligence.
Right. He tricks this highly intelligent predator into leaving the main ship and entering a smaller lifeboat, which they can then detach and destroy. It's a victory for synthesis over brute force.
It is. But it raises a deeper question about human perception.
I want to push back a little on the premise here, or rather, ask you a challenging question about this encounter. Is the crew's initial success, its ability to kill so many crewmen, really just because the universe is inherently dangerous? Or did the crew's strict, inflexible departmental thinking literally blind them to the reality of the predator sitting right in front of them?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, the old saying goes, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're a biologist whose entire career is focused on cataloging basic cellular structures, do you completely miss the malicious, calculating intelligence looking back at you in the creature's eyes?
That touches on something crucial. It is absolutely both. Van Vogt uses the physical danger of the universe to expose the cognitive failure of the crew.
The monster is real, but their blindness is what let it in.
Exactly. The encounter establishes the foundational tone of the entire novel. The universe is not just a sterile laboratory waiting to be cataloged. It is a place of incredible, malevolent strangeness. However, the true existential danger to the Space Beagle isn't just the panther with tentacles.
What is it then?
The true danger is their inability to process the threat because their cognitive frameworks are too narrow. Their silos acted as blinders.
Right. They couldn't see the threat because there was no Department of Tentacle Panther intentions to file the report under.
That's a great way to put it. And this is where Grosvenor begins his long character arc. He starts as this brilliant but entirely unappreciated outsider. The crew looks down on him because he doesn't fit into a neat, traditional academic box.
But he proved them wrong.
He did. By synthesizing the data and saving them from the curl, he begins an uphill battle to demonstrate the necessity of Nexialism to a deeply skeptical, entrenched bureaucracy.
But, the universe seems to adapt to Grosvenor's successes. Physical brute force and animal cunning failed to destroy the ship. So the cosmos shifts to a battlefield where steel bulkheads and laser rifles are entirely useless. The universe decides it has to break the crew mentally.
Evolving from the visceral threat of claws and tentacles, we move into the second major section of the book, covering chapters 9 through 12. This was originally published as the novella War of Nerves.
Right. Having survived a physical predator, the Space Beagle now encounters a civilization known as the Rim.
The Rim.
Yeah, the Rim are a race of bird-like aliens. But their physical form is completely irrelevant to the danger they pose. The issue is that they have incredibly powerful telepathic abilities.
And we really need to explain the mechanics of this telepathy because Van Vogt isn't relying on the friendly comic book version of mind reading where an alien just speaks English in your head.
Right, it's not like Professor X.
Not at all. The text describes it as a psychic assault, rooted in profound cognitive dissonance. The psychic signals sent by the Rim are completely, fundamentally incompatible with the human mind.
How does that actually work? What does an incompatible signal feel like?
Think of it this way. Imagine trying to run a modern, highly complex 3D video game on a computer built in 1985.
Oh, the hardware would just melt.
The hardware simply cannot process the data. The architecture of human thought, the way our neurons fire, the way we perceive linear time and Euclidean space, cannot process the frequency or the conceptual nature of the information the Rim are broadcasting.
So they aren't even trying to be hostile.
The Rim aren't necessarily sending a message that says, we want to kill you. The sheer incompatibility of the signals causes a catastrophic system failure in the human brain.
And the impact on the crew is terrifying. It results in widespread, violent hallucinations and total madness breaking out across the ship. It's an epidemic of insanity in a closed system.
Which is a horrifying thought.
Now, thinking about you listening to this right now, consider the modern concept of information overload. We are bombarded every single day with signals. Social media algorithms designed to outrage us, 24/7 news cycles, constant emails, notifications pinging on our wrists.
It never stops.
Human brains did not evolve to process this volume, velocity, or specific type of data. When you are hit with signals completely incompatible with your mental processing bandwidth, your system crashes. You get anxious, you lose focus, you burn out.
The Rim are essentially the ultimate weaponized version of that cognitive overload. They're flooding the crew's mental bandwidth with alien data until their grip on reality completely breaks down.
And traditional defenses fail here.
Completely. The military officers can't shoot a telepathic signal with a laser. The chemistry department can't synthesize a potion to stop a radio wave of madness.
And I imagine the internal power struggles on the ship only get worse.
Oh, they intensify significantly. Because as everyone loses their minds, their paranoia spikes, and they start violently blaming the other departments.
Okay, so how does the generalist fix a psychic attack? If Nexialism is about synthesizing science, how does Grosvenor fight an invisible mental war?
Because Nexialism isn't just about reading a lot of books across different fields. It's deeply focused on the applied mechanisms of those fields. Grosvenor's training includes practical, applied psychological techniques, specifically hypnosis, autosuggestion, and mental conditioning.
But, I mean, how does human hypnosis bridge the gap of alien telepathy? That sounds a bit like magical thinking.
It sounds like it, but it's actually grounded in a fascinating mechanism. Grosvenor uses autosuggestion to create a mental quarantine within his own brain.
A mental quarantine.
Yeah, think about a submarine that has taken damage. To stop the whole ship from sinking, the crew seals off the heavy steel bulkheads, quarantining the flooded compartments to protect the dry ones.
Oh, okay.
Grosvenor uses mental conditioning to drop psychological bulkheads in his mind. He intentionally compartmentalizes his consciousness, filtering out the incompatible alien signals so they can't crash his entire neural network.
He essentially isolates his core consciousness from the noise.
Exactly. He anchors himself. And because he isn't driven mad by the overload, he is able to take the next crucial step.
Which is?
Using his synthesized knowledge of biology and communication, he manages to project his own structured thoughts back at the rim. He finds a translation matrix, basically a way to bridge the gap between their incompatible signals and human comprehension, neutralizing the threat and stopping the madness.
Wow. It's a huge thematic shift in the narrative. We've moved from a tangible, predatory hunt with the Curl-like, a monster hiding in the dark, to a literal war of nerves.
Very different kind of warfare.
It pits fragile human psychology against a powerful, abstract alien consciousness. It demonstrates that a true explorer must be prepared for threats that don't just want to eat your body, but challenge the very nature of your reality.
Exactly. If the crew had only learned from the Curl and spent the next month building better physical cages and laser rifles, they still would have been decimated by the rim. Surviving the universe requires an adaptable, synthesized mind, not just a thicker shield.
And having conquered the physical claws of the Curl and the mental assault of the rim, you might think that Cosmos would give the crew of the Space Beagle a moment to catch their breath.
You'd hope so.
But the universe is relentless. It seems to realize that if physical force fails and mental manipulation fails, it needs to create a perfect, terrifying, biological machine that combines both.
A creature so primal and horrifying that Hollywood would literally borrow its DNA decades later to terrify millions of moviegoers.
Yes. This escalation brings us to the third section of the narrative, chapters 13 through 21, which was based on the novella Discord in Scarlet. Here, the Space Beagle encounters what might be the ultimate predator, a being named Ixtal.
Ixtal.
Let's describe Ixtal because the imagery is incredibly striking. It is described as a powerful, scarlet, almost devil-like being. It has 4 arms, legs, it's incredibly strong. But crucially, the way they find it is that it is capable of surviving the absolute zero and vacuum of Jimp space. It just floats out there in the void, waiting.
And its backstory is immense. Van Vogt leans heavily back into Spenglerian theory here. Ixtal is not just an animal from a nearby planet. It is the last survivor of a race that ruled an entirely previous universe.
Wait, a previous universe?
Yes. Before the Big Bang that created our current cosmos, Ixtal's people were the dominant force. It has literally survived the death and rebirth of the universe itself.
That is an unbelievable resume for a monster, a creature that predates time. And its methodology is pure, unadulterated horror.
It really is.
Like the Curl, it gets brought aboard the Space Beagle. But it doesn't just want to eat the crew for their potassium. It begins a reign of terror, stalking the dark, metallic corridors of the ship, specifically hunting the scientists and officers.
But it doesn't kill them immediately.
No. It captures them, paralyzes them, and uses their living bodies as hosts to implant its parasitic eggs into their chests.
The crew members are kept alive, paralyzed in a state of horrific awareness, while these eggs incubate inside their chest cavities, preparing to hatch and violently consume the host from the inside out.
Okay, I have to pause here. We absolutely must unpack the massive pop culture legacy staring us right in the face.
It's impossible to ignore.
Let's look at the mechanics. A monstrous, seemingly indestructible alien. It survives in the vacuum of space. It gets brought aboard an enclosed spaceship. It stalks the crew through the claustrophobic corridors. It captures them, not for food, but to implant parasitic eggs into their chests so its offspring can burst out.
Sound familiar?
Am I crazy, or is this exactly the plot of Ridley Scott's 1979 masterpiece, Alien? The Xenomorph.
You are seeing the pattern perfectly. The similarities are entirely undeniable. Ixtal is the prototype xenomorph, an implacable, terrifying alien using Starship crew members as living incubators.
It's so obviously the same blueprint.
And this isn't just a fun piece of trivia noted by sci-fi fans on internet forums. This was a significant, real-world legal matter. A.E. Van Vogt actually sued 20th Century Fox over the striking similarities between his creature Ixtal and the xenomorph.
I had no idea it went to an actual lawsuit. What happened? Did he win?
They ultimately settled out of court. Now, Fox didn't legally admit fault, but the fact that a major studio settled speaks volumes about how closely the film mirrored the core mechanical blueprint of Discord in Scarlet.
That's wild.
Van Vogt's pulp imagination from 1939 literally provided the DNA for one of the greatest, most successful sci-fi horror franchises of all time. The facehugger, the chest burster, the conceptual lineage points right back to the Space Beagle.
It's just wild to think that this old fix-up novel is the architectural foundation of such a massive piece of modern cinema.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to the book, the introduction of Ixtal shows a clear, terrifying pattern of escalating stakes.
Oh, absolutely. Consider the progression. The Curl was a hungry, desperate animal from a dying world. The Rim were an incompatible intelligence trying to communicate. But Ixtal represents a primal, seemingly indestructible biological imperative.
It's just pure survival and reproduction.
It is reproduction at its most violent and uncompromising. A creature that has survived the thermodynamic death of a previous universe is not going to be stopped by a few scientists with laser pistols.
And this creates a really interesting friction in the writing itself. As a reader, you have this contrast between the novel's reliance on what we'd call super science plot devices and this gritty, pulp imagination alien biology.
The source text notes that Van Vogt often relied on technology that is described as almost magical to get his characters out of logistical corners.
Like what?
For example, the ship possesses the ability to perform an instant deceleration from light speed.
Okay, from a modern physics standpoint, that's absurd. The inertia alone would instantly turn the crew into a thin layer of soup on the front wall of the ship.
Exactly. It's a convenient super science plot device. But the aliens are raw, visceral, intensely biological nightmares.
Which raises the question. If you have a ship with magical super science engines and devastating energy weapons, does that technological superiority mean anything at all when faced with an ancient, implacable biological threat like Ixtal?
The novel suggests that technology alone is entirely insufficient. Ixtal's biology makes it practically immune to their conventional weapons. Glosner cannot just shoot it, and he can't easily blow it out of an airlock because it survives in a vacuum.
Right, so what does he do?
He again has to rely on pure logic and Nexialism. He has to study its behavior, understand its biological imperatives regarding its eggs, deduce its ultimate weakness, and outthink a creature that is older than time itself.
By using consilience again.
Right. He relies on synthesis, combining structural engineering, biology, and physics to manipulate the ship's environment to corner it.
Defeating a scarlet devil monster from a previous universe that wants to lay eggs in your chest seems like the absolute peak of danger. You'd think the crew could finally retire, pat themselves on the back, and head home.
You would certainly hope they'd turn the ship around.
But the novel has one final section, and the next threat makes Ixtal look like a minor pest in the garden. Because this next entity doesn't just want to lay eggs in a few crew members, it wants to eat the entire galaxy.
The scale is astronomical.
And dealing with it forces our hero, the brilliant Nexialist Grosvenor, into some incredibly dark, morally dubious territory.
This brings us to the final major arc of the book, beginning in Chapter 22, based on the story M33 in Andromeda. The Space Beagle has left the Milky Way and is traveling between galaxies when they encounter the Anubis.
The Anubis, how do you even describe the mechanics of this thing? It is the most terrifying life form yet, because it lacks a tangible body. It is a galaxy-spanning, nebular dust consciousness.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It's not a creature you can look at in a room. It is a massive cloud of cosmic dust that possesses a singular, ravenous intelligence.
To understand how dust thinks, you have to imagine electromagnetic pathways stretching across light years, functioning like the neural pathways of a human brain. The anubis feeds on neuroelectric energy.
Like the curl fed on the id.
Exactly, but on a macro scale. It feeds on the spark of life and the accumulated knowledge of civilizations.
Oh.
And it is incredibly successful at what it does.
So it's already eaten before.
The text reveals that the anubis has already devoured entire star systems. It is essentially a cosmic parasite that drains the vital energy of planets until nothing is left but dead rock. It is a threat of unimaginable scale.
And naturally, when faced with an entity that could literally devour the Milky Way, the highly educated crew of the Space Beagle acts rationally, unifies their departments, and works together to stop it, right?
Oh, of course not.
Of course not.
This is where the internal political infighting, the true villain of the piece, reaches its absolute toxic peak. Remember Gregory Kent, the hostile head of the chemistry department?
Yeah, the guy who hated Grosvenor.
He leaves a massive faction of the crew who outright refuse to accept the existence of the anubis.
They are standing in the path of a cosmic hurricane, and they are aggressively denying the existence of wind. Why? How can scientists be so blind?
Because Grosvenor's evidence is, in their specialized view, too scant. He has synthesized massive amounts of disparate data. Fluctuations in the interstellar dust, missing energy signatures from nearby dead stars, subtle changes in the ship's electromagnetic shielding.
All pointing to the anubis.
Right, to prove the anubis exists and what its intentions are. But because Kent and the chemists cannot see it purely through the lens of a test tube and the biologists can't dissect it on a table, they dismiss it.
They just reject the whole premise.
Their siloed thinking has evolved from a simple blind spot into active suicidal denial.
It's infuriating to read, but again, it rings completely true to human nature. People will aggressively deny a complex existential truth if acknowledging it requires them to abandon their established worldview or admit that their specific expertise is insufficient.
It threatens their egos.
So the galaxy is about to be eaten, the crew is stubbornly sitting on their hands demanding more localized data, and Grosvenor realizes that polite academic debate is no longer an option. And this is where Grosvenor's tactics become incredibly questionable.
In a last-ditch effort to save the ship and the galaxy, Grosvenor decides to use his Nexial training to violently seize control of the Space Beagle against the will of the crew.
He stages a one-man coup. But I want to understand the mechanics here. How does one guy take over a ship of 1,000 hostile scientists?
He leverages his holistic understanding of the ship's interconnected systems. He doesn't just pull a gun. He uses the ship's artificial gravity, its lighting systems, and its communication grid.
He hacks the ship?
He hacks the environment. He creates subaudible rhythms and strobing light patterns that induce a highly suggestible theta-wave hypnotic state across the entire vessel simultaneously.
Wait, what?
He essentially hacks the human nervous system through environmental manipulation and then broadcasts post-hypnotic commands to paralyze their resistance.
He brainwashes them.
Yeah.
And his plan is desperate. Once he has forceful control of the ship, he forces the Space Beagle to engage the anubis, acting as bait. He takes this massive entity on a 5-year wild goose chase deep into the empty, lightless void of space between galaxies.
The strategy is intentional starvation. By luring the anubis into deep space, far away from any life or planetary systems, he ensures it has absolutely nothing to feed on.
Because if he doesn't,
He has to prevent it from following the ship back to Earth, which would result in the consumption of all life in the Milky Way.
it is a colossal sacrifice. 5 years of running through the dark, being hunted by a starving dust cloud. But I have to push back aggressively here on Grosvenor as the hero.
It's a fair point to push back on.
Let's look at what he actually did. He hypnotizes his colleagues, he violently forces his way, he completely strips 1,000 people of their free will and agency. Did our protagonist just become an arrogant dictator?
It certainly looks that way.
I'd argue this is the ultimate failure of Nexialism. He preaches about the grand synthesis of knowledge and communication, but when push came to shove, he couldn't actually convince anyone with logic. He had to resort to brute force and brainwashing. He robbed them of their humanity to save their biology.
I'd argue it goes even deeper than that. And your concern is completely valid. The text itself doesn't shy away from it.
Really?
Yeah, the critical analysis of the novel explicitly notes that Grosvenor is an incredibly arrogant character, and his moral tactics here are deeply questionable. However, within the Spenglerian and evolutionary framework of the novel, this action forces a deeply uncomfortable debate about survival versus ethics.
How does dictatorship fit into the evolutionary framework?
Because it forces the confrontation between internal division and external survival to its absolute breaking point. Grosvenor's actions are ugly. They are dictatorial, yes. But Van Vogt is posing a brutal question. What is the ethical value of free will if it results in the extinction of the human race? The novel is arguing that humanity must overcome its internal divisions to face the challenges of the cosmos. Ideally, that happens through consilience and cooperation. But when entrenched bureaucracy and academic ego prevent cooperation, survival takes primal precedence over academic courtesy.
So the ends justify the means. That's a terrifying philosophy.
It's meant to be terrifying. By the end of this 5-year ordeal, as the Anubis finally starves to death in the void, the crew doesn't throw a parade for Grosvenor. They don't cheer for him.
I would hope not.
They give a grudging, resentful acceptance to his leadership. They wake up to the reality that they survived, but the method was undeniably dark. It completes the novel's cycle. Humanity survives its encounter with the unknown, but it loses a piece of its innocence in the process.
It is a fascinating, deeply uncomfortable gray area to end on. It's not a triumphant sci-fi ending. It's a bruised, battered crew realizing that the arrogant generalist they hated was the only reason they didn't go extinct.
It's a very sobering conclusion.
Taking a step back from this dramatic climax, let's zoom out. We need to evaluate the lasting legacy of this book and, most importantly, what you, the listener, can apply to your own modern life.
Let's review the massive concepts Van Vogt wove into this narrative. He grounded the space opera in Oswald Spengler's historical cycles, using the ruins of fallen civilizations to remind us that progress isn't a straight line, and that our own institutions might be entering their winter phase of rigid, siloed decline.
And beyond Spengler, there is the prophetic science. We've talked deeply about Nexialism and how it predicted E.O. Wilson's concept of consilience. Van Vogt wrote a blueprint in 1950 for the idea that true scientific breakthroughs don't happen deep inside the silos of biology or physics, but in the connective tissue between them.
But to be fair and objective, we have to acknowledge the flaws in the novel. As a piece of literature, it is not perfect.
No, not at all.
The fix-up origin is very apparent. The episodic structure makes it feel slightly disjointed, lacking the smooth narrative flow of a novel conceived as a single entity.
And the prose itself. We have to be honest, it was written in the 40s and 50s for pulp magazines. Critics rightly point out that the prose is often dated.
Very dated.
The dialogue can be incredibly stilted. You have these supposed brilliant scientists talking to each other in massive, unnatural paragraphs of pure exposition. And we already discussed the reliance on magical superscience to resolve logistical issues.
Plus, as we just debated, Grosvenor's willingness to use mind control makes him a profoundly difficult hero to root for by modern ethical standards.
But despite the clunky dialogue, the magical engines, and the morally ambiguous protagonist, the novel's immense influence is simply undeniable. It is a foundational text. It is a key progenitor of the entire space opera and scientific exploration subgenres.
It built the framework for so much of what came after.
Consider the legacy. When Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek, he wasn't building a military warship. He built the USS Enterprise, a ship of scientific exploration, navigating the cosmos, dealing with bizarre alien life forms and complex moral dilemmas. The voyage of the Space Beagle provided the blueprint for that format.
And, as we discussed with the Ridley Scott lawsuit, it provided the literal mechanical narrative architecture for Alien, birthing one of the most successful horror franchises in cinema history. Its DNA is woven into everything we watch.
But beyond the pop culture trivia, I want to connect this directly back to you. The core lesson of this book isn't about how to fight a tentacle panther or run away from a galaxy-eating dust cloud.
Thankfully.
It's about how you process the world around you. We live in an era of extreme information overload and hyper-specialized career paths. You are constantly pressured to narrow your focus, to put on blinders and stay in your lane.
The silos are everywhere.
But operating in a silo is a massive existential weakness. When you only see the world through one narrow lens, you are blind to the predators. Whether they are unexpected economic shifts, AI technological disruptions, or sudden societal changes that are lurking just outside your field of view.
The application here is to strive to be a modern-day Nexialist. And to be clear, that doesn't mean you have to be a world-class master of every single subject. That's impossible.
Right.
It means cultivating the ability to synthesize. It means actively seeking consilience.
How does someone actually do that practically? Give us a framework.
It starts with intellectual curiosity outside your domain. If you're an engineer, read sociology. If you are in marketing, study evolutionary biology. Look for the underlying mechanisms that connect these fields.
Expand your inputs.
Exactly. When faced with a complex problem at work, don't just ask, how does my department solve this? Ask, what would this problem look like to a biologist or an economist? Finding the connections that others miss, seeing the entire board rather than just your one designated square, is the key to adapting and thriving in a world that is changing faster than our specialized institutions can handle.
So, to wrap up our journey today, we started with a somewhat disjointed, patched-together 1950s pulp novel. We watched a crew of stubborn, siloed scientists battle a deception-loving beast, survive a psychic barrage of cognitive dissonance, outwit a terrifying alien parasite from a dead universe, and flee a galaxy-eating cloud of cosmic dust.
It's been a wild ride.
And through it all, we discovered the architectural foundation of modern science fiction and explored a remarkably prescient argument for interdisciplinary thought.
It is a profound testament to the power of imaginative fiction. It uses extreme scenarios to expose very real human vulnerabilities. And this raises an important final question, something to leave you mulling over.
Let's hear it.
If a literal alien threat arrived tomorrow, our highly specialized, politically divided global institutions might be too fractured to even recognize the danger, let alone synthesize a defense. But we don't need to look to the stars for existential threats.
No, we don't.
Looking at the massive systemic global challenges we face today, challenges that absolutely require synthesis and consilience to solve, are we already the crew of the Space Beagle? Are we trapped in our departmental silos, stubbornly defending our own academic and political turf, just waiting for a real-world Nexialist to forcibly synthesize our knowledge before it's too late?
That is a chilling and necessary thought to leave on. Just remember, when the monster is finally banging on the door, your department title won't save you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep breaking down those silos, and keep connecting the dots in your own life. We'll see you next time.